Hi everybody, welcome to Talking Automotive with Mark and John. My name is John Sinclair and my co-host Mark Palavestra.
Hi John, today we've got an amazing guest speaker. We've got Mike Whitfield from Nissan in Africa. So he is the chairman of Nissan in Africa, and he shares some amazing information on the automotive industry and the dynamics across the continent, and also shares his amazing career on what makes a successful business an OEM and dealer relationship, along with other wins from a managerial and leadership perspective. So a very, very diverse episode with some really good content that can cross over not just the auto industry, but good leadership in general.
Yeah, Mark, what was really interesting for me is this discussion around manufacturing. Manufacturing is such an important component of automotive, and he spoke in depth about what they're doing in Africa. His role as president of the African Association for Automotive Manufacturers, where they're working with governments and other OEM manufacturers and component suppliers to develop a whole manufacturing infrastructure across Africa. It's a long-term plan, but very fascinating how they're going about it and what they want to achieve out of it. So well worth a listen. Let's jump into the show.
With 30 years' experience in auto logistics and state-of-the-art locations in 5 major Australian cities, Precar Fleet Services is an independent division of Precar Services, offering specialty fleet fit-outs for commercial applications ranging from simple tray and tow bar fitments to fully bespoke service body and accessory installation. With quality-assured safety, compliance and standardisation of vehicle builds, Precar Fleet Services are a premier all-in-one solutions provider for commercial vehicle fleet operators, leasing companies, and original equipment manufacturers. For further information on how Precar Fleet Services can assist in solving your commercial vehicle fit-out needs, please visit precar.com.au and click on the link to Fleet Services.
Today we're talking to Mike Whitfield, who's an accomplished global senior executive with more than 30 years automotive experience. He's currently the chairman of Nissan Africa South and the managing director of Nissan Egypt. He is also the president of the African Automotive Manufacturing Association, and he's held previous positions as managing director of Nissan South Africa for more than 12 years, and also managing director of Nissan Nordic Europe for 3.5 years. Mark, welcome to the show and good to have you speaking to us today.
Yeah, hi John, and hi Mark, and greetings from Cairo. I'm actually up in Cairo at the moment in these very extraordinary times we find ourselves in. Not too much travel, but am managing to move around a little bit between South Africa and Egypt at the moment. So thank you for having me, and look forward to our discussion today.
It's great to hear that you're actually mobile. We've been locked in total isolation down here in Melbourne for quite a few months, and we're envious that you can actually move around your continent at least, which is great. Now, Mike, I'm keen to ask a question of if you could tell us who Mike Whitfield is and what drives and motivates you.
Thanks, Mark. I mean, I'm 61 years old. I'm a South African. I've grown up in the auto industry. I have only really worked for one company, and that is Nissan Motor Company. I joined them actually as a management trainee in 1991. So actually, John, I've been here close to 40 years now, not even 30, and had the fantastic opportunity of being able to work in just about every facet of the auto industry of Nissan, and also in Europe and Africa, the opportunity to do startup, build businesses. It's really been a fantastic experience. Automotive has been in my blood. My passion at the moment, and has always been, is how do we really realize the true potential of automotive and automotive industry within Africa. And that remains my drive and what I'm working and focusing a lot of my time on, of how we can actually realize the true potential of automotive in Africa.
Now, a question for me leading on from that. Can you tell us some highlights of your career and what's really stood out for you?
I think 3 key aspects. One is obviously the opportunity to work in a number of different countries. But probably if I had to highlight key parts of my life, one was when I first had full P&L responsibility of a business unit. And that was when I moved into our UD truck or Nissan diesel business in South Africa and covered the full aspect from manufacturing all the way through to distribution and sales. The next step, which was something that you and I had the opportunity to work together on, and that was establishing establishing a totally new startup for Nissan in Northern Europe when we set up a company called Nissan Nordic, based in Finland, operating in all the Nordic countries and Baltic countries. And the highlight of that was starting the company, employing everyone who'd been part of a team that employed everyone in the company. And what really was the most motivating factor is we ended up with something like 180 people, 17 different nationalities, average age 32, diversity, male, female, probably 50-50. And to see that team come together and build a business, which today is doing exceptionally well for Nissan in Northern Europe, was a great highlight. The return back to South Africa to start focusing on Africa, building our Africa operations, establishing with a partner an assembly operation in Nigeria, and now sitting up and spending time in Cairo in Egypt, where Nissan is the only 100% OEM invested in Egypt, and working with all stakeholders as how we can not only develop Egypt's automotive market, because it is certainly has huge potential, but also how we can integrate it into the Africa automotive market.
The Egyptian market, you were saying, Mike, is very buoyant right now, which is very unusual given that you look at the global circumstances. So have you got the Midas touch?
No, nothing to do with me, unfortunately. No, if we look at the Egyptian market, you've got a country of 100+ million people. It's before the entry or the COVID pandemic. Economic growth was very strong, market was growing, business was growing. So it went into the crisis on a positive note. It's come out. It's one of the few countries that people are still talking about having a positive GDP for the year. But from an automotive perspective, if you bring it back, 100+ million people, as I said, positive economic growth, Forex relatively stable, in fact, strengthening, interest rates coming down. And today, Egypt only has a ownership of around about 42 cars per thousand versus, let's take the other extreme, US, which is up at 900. The TRV in Egypt is just on 200,000. So the potential is huge to grow. So I think what we're seeing is just moving towards a true potential. The TRV of 200,000 is, in my view, significantly under the real opportunity in this market. And I think of all the countries in Africa, it's probably one market that, on a percentage growth point of view on TRV, will outstrip anyone else in Africa.
You mentioned one of your key highlights was setting up the Nissan business in the Nordics. So it takes a strong leader to be able to do that, have a startup and have a startup that continues to this day to be a strong performer. So I'm keen to ask a question of you, which is around leadership. So what were those attributes that you found made you lead to having such a successful business?
I think let me go back. A few things. Obviously, I've had the opportunity during my career to interact and work with a lot of great leaders and great people. And the one thing that I've always tried to practice in everything I do is as one moves through an organization, always remember things that you didn't like happening to you and never do them. Always take the good, ensure you put that into practice, and the bad, make sure you don't do it. Secondly, it's very important to build a team of diversity in the sense of talents and skills and strengths and weaknesses that complement each other. The one thing I don't go and look for is, when I put together a leadership team, is a lot of people the same as me. The other important thing, I think, as one moves around and works in markets of different cultures, whether it's in the Nordics, whether it's in the Middle East or in Egypt, is where I am now, or Africa, is to ensure that you really have that respect for the culture and make a big effort to understand the culture and the dynamics of the country, the market. And the objective is not to go and apply your beliefs and your culture there. Your objective really is, how do you take that knowledge that you've learned from various steps in your career and see how you can adapt it to help grow the business that you're working in. The important thing, as I say, is respect the culture, respect the trends, respect the business there, and see how you can improve it based on your benchmarks and your knowledge. And very importantly, listen and understand that there's a lot that you can learn from the local team members who have achieved success in the market, and be open to ideas. Don't always defend your own position. I think that's very important. I think too often we make a decision a year, 2 years ago. Down the line, we find maybe it wasn't the right decision. There's really no point in defending that. Make sure that you're prepared to make that change and move on. So for me, one is be open, listen, ensure that I'm not a great fan of building a hierarchical organization. So certainly I feel that cross-functionality, communication is the foundation. And the one lesson and the one thing that I did learn when we did set up Nissan Nordic, and John was very much part of that, was just how capable and what people can do when they all work together and cross-functionally. And as I said, we had 180 people from 17 odd different nationalities and very young age, average age 32. Not great experience in the auto industry, but one shared vision, one shared purpose, and working together. What the end result was a very successful startup and a foundation that goes from strength to strength.
Carrying on a little bit from that, speaking about cultures and language ability, is there any particular things that people should be aware of when working across different countries?
Well, I think the one thing that is definitely not one of my strengths, and that's language skills. What I do make a great effort to make sure before I respond that things are not lost in translation. So to ensure that we have a good understanding of what is being trying to be communicated, because I think too often if you react too quickly, you will find lost in translation. I do find that often if I'm in a meeting and it's a subject that I'm fairly familiar with, I encourage them to rather do the meeting in the local language, and I have someone else who rather translates. It's very important. It picks up speed. It ensures nothing is lost in it. But the key thing is always make sure that you fully understand before you respond. So I think listening is one skill that you have to develop when operating in different cultures and different languages.
It's a bit like one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. It's the first seek to understand, then to be understood. So very much ahead of the Stephen Covey practices there, which makes sense that you've had such success with it. Now, having run many successful auto companies in these different countries, what are the key, if you were just to really narrow it down, what would be the 3 key things that need to be done to ensure that success?
I think first and foremost is have a vision, know where you want to get to, and make sure that there's alignment with your team on that vision is, for me, very important. I think understanding that, particularly in the markets that we operate in Africa, for example, volatile, it is dynamic. Be prepared to, while you have a vision, you have actions to get there, but be prepared to change it as you go along. Not giving up on the vision, but certainly on the actions and the way to get there. And then I think very importantly for me is empowering the people. If we don't empower our people and ensure that they're properly enabled to do, it doesn't matter what vision, what actions you want to put in place, you're not going to get there. So those would be what I see as my 3 key aspects, and be very open to ideas. None of us have the license to everything, and it's amazing what can come out from people.
Now, Mark, in terms of dealers play a very important role to any automotive manufacturer. Are there any particular things that you see as very important to get the dealers engaged and on board and working with you?
I think 3 things. One, the starting point is you need to develop trust, you need to have open communication, and there needs to be alignment of both parties' objectives. It's fundamental that we all work towards ensuring a profitable dealer network. If your dealer network is not profitable, you certainly are not ever going to, both of you are not going to achieve your objectives. At the end of the day, we as a distributor or OEM need our dealers, and the dealers need us, and mutually we can work together. But fundamentally, we need to align our objectives, and we also need to understand that the key driver at the end of the day is that both parties must win. It cannot be one-sided. Understanding that you're going to have ups and downs, you're going to go through secular challenges, and it's economic-wise, product-wise, brands do go up and down, and there's a long-term relationship that one needs to keep building. But fundamentally, open communication and trust, and a shared vision where one's going to get to.
And just following on from that, have you found big differences with dealers across different countries, or is it much the same? You take the same principle approach no matter where you're working? No,
I think there are differences. Fundamentally, obviously, the one consistent factor across all markets is the need to ensure that you have a customer-focused approach. But certainly, there are significant differences. And if I just look at the South African market compared, for example, the Egyptian market, I would say the South African market is fairly closely aligned to the Australian auto industry and auto retail business. You can probably comment more on that, as also aligned to the UK, whereas in Egypt, you have a scenario where majority of the brands. In fact, all the brands except us, Nissan, are both the importer, in some cases manufacturer, and also the main retailer. They really participate in the full value chain. And in Egypt, what has really grown is they have an extensive number of what I would call multi-brand showrooms and dealerships, where and these are certainly superb facilities. They sit inside some of the best malls. They cover everything that's on offer, superb showrooms, sales staff that work 2 shifts. They open at 10 in the morning, close at 10 at night. They account for about 50% of the new vehicle business in Egypt. Customers are very comfortable going in there, looking at all the brands, superb training of their salespeople. So something that, due to the fact that this market is really dominated by locally owned businesses who have the full value chain, and in many cases, many different brands, you haven't got that traditional approach where as an OEM, we want to have single brand focus in our dealership. It's developed into a very multi-brand market. Prices move very fast, up and down, transactional prices. So right now, as I was saying, the market is booming. We and many of the brands have a number of models that are overpriced in the sense that if a model's in short supply, people pay above retail. When they're oversupplied, they drop below retail. So it's a very clear definition of economics 101. It's supply and demand. Obviously, when I go to my dealers and say, well, it's in short supply, so I'm increasing my wholesale, that part doesn't work. But certainly the retail price moves up and down fairly quickly, an indication of supply and demand. So the market reacts. And as I say, people are very happy going to multi-brand showrooms that are not aligned at all with any of the franchises. They're pure multi-brand and really high quality. Certainly, if I look at the professionalism of the salespeople, excellent. That's probably the biggest single difference I see between the South African market and the Egyptian market.
And Mike, how do you get the focus then on the salespeople to focus on your brand if they've got basically a range that they could sell to that prospective customer? How do you get an unfair share of their attention on the Nissan brand?
Obviously, the basics, making sure that we have very good communication. The fundamentals need to be there. You need to have the attractive product correctly priced. You need to make sure that you can differentiate yourself in the market in terms of giving the best customer focus, the best service to your dealers. Ease of doing business needs to be very high because that is definitely a competitive advantage in here. Creating the brand awareness, and you have to work pretty hard to actually get to the stage where the customer's asking, because as you can imagine, and when 50% of the business goes through multi-brand, the salesman will react more to customer than what he's got there. And to ensure that you've got the right incentive packages and structures on the table. And communication, as I say, just make sure that they're aware of the product and you creating the demand. That's the critical thing. So you really have to get the customer to push for your product.
And Mark, in that sort of a multi-brand environment, do you still drive your branding standards and those things quite hard, or do you pull back a bit on it?
No, I think so there's no confusion, I'm saying 50% of the business goes through multi-brand. The other 50% does go through our full Nissan fully branded dealerships. The challenge is to how do we get a bigger percentage of that business through our dealerships rather than ending up at the multi-brand dealerships, because what's happening is you're actually losing the customer because the customer data, it all ends up with the multi-brand dealership. But more importantly, the brand dealership or our Nissan dealership is giving up that entire second gross. They're not picking up the back-end income that's traditionally associated. Average gross dealer margin is 4.5%. The dealers need to complement that, and the only way to do that, because if they're giving up 50% of the sales to multi-brand dealerships, they're only getting that first gross. So what we're working very hard at doing is bringing back more and more of the retail customer to the dealership and not to the multi-brand. And as a result, the dealer can make the full value, both the first and the second gross from back end.
And where do you see the future for electric cars? And is there still a place for the traditional internal combustion engine, given you've got such a diverse market on the African continent to look after?
There's definitely a place in the market for alternative, EV being a key element of it, with all the other features that come in from an intelligent mobility point of view, the varying degrees of autonomous drive. The adoption will vary from market to market, and certainly I think countries within Africa will certainly follow a lot later than any of the other markets. And that being said, there will definitely be a role for ICE internal combustion vehicles in Africa and the markets where we operate for some time to come. But one thing we must never forget is Africa's a very quick adopter. I mean, if we look at mobile banking, Africa is probably one of the fastest growing from a mobile banking point of view. So they adopt technology very fast, but for the foreseeable future, I don't necessarily see EV dominating much in the Africa continent. Yes, making inroads, but not dominating. The infrastructure is not in place. The road conditions certainly are not ready for it yet. But is there a future? Yes, without doubt. And if we look at the direction with all manufacturers, us very much in the forefront of that as Nissan, bringing EV, other related hybrid technologies to the market, the offerings are going to continually increase as well. And as we know, the cost is also coming down. So yes, there is a role, although I believe Africa will lag the development in the mature markets by some stage in terms of adoption.
Now, Mark, a question for me. Nissan has had a number of really iconic brands, the GTR, the Nissan Z, and you're just in the process of launching the 400Z Proto. Can you tell us a bit about those cars?
I mean, as you say, if we go back, the Nissan Z is certainly very much part of our heritage and continues to reinforce them, as we've just announced and shared the Proto, which is not a concept car. It's exactly what it is. It says Proto. It really just reconfirms that commitment to keeping excitement back in the brand and back in ownership. And as we go forward, we will share more and more on the new Z or 400Z, we call it. But it's very much at the heart of and the foundation of bringing back excitement and having excitement in our range and the brand and the product.
Now, Nissan's recently restructured operations, particularly with regards to Africa, Middle East, Europe, India and Russia, etc. Can you tell us what the advantages of this structure are and why this is a good outcome?
So I think if we look at the markets, obviously, and you refer particularly to our AMEO region, which is Africa, Middle East, India, Oceania and Europe, there's a lot of synergies in terms of the product, the vehicle standards, the customer base, and it enables us, I think, to leverage a lot of synergies across the market, certainly from a product point of view, from an after-sales customer focus point of view. Apart from Oceania, we're all more or less on the same time zone as well, which makes a big difference, certainly. But the real benefit is that we can leverage resources across a market now which accounts for close on 30% of global TRV if we take the new region and ensure that we can get the efficiencies and synergies and from a product point of view, from a market approach across a far wider base. So certainly our point of view and sitting in one of the countries, we see the opportunities of and benefits of that, as well as the fact that at the end of the day, we need to empower our countries and down at the market side more and have agility. It also brings agility and speed of decision making and quicker communication back to what's happening on the market. So certainly it is very much part of the future Nissan Next direction and was part of the plan, was announced as part of the plan, and we're starting to see the benefits. It's very early days, the new regions that have been shared, but the real benefit is that we will have good alignment on product.
And because that then flows on to another question, we've seen General Motors in this country formerly being the number one and massive market leader to exiting the market on the back of right-hand drive and product complexity. So given this is a 30% global TIV region, is South Africa the only right-hand drive market within that region?
No, you've got South Africa, you've got UK, you have India, you've got a number of markets in sub-Saharan Africa that are right-hand drive, and Australia is right-hand drive. So if you look at Australia, UK, South Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and India, it's a substantial part of the TRV of the region. So certainly right-hand drive is very much part of our strategy going forward.
As an operative in a right-hand drive market, that's refreshing to hear, because when we hear brands say right-hand drive, it's only a drop in the ocean. We don't want to spend money on engineering, and suddenly the product choices start disappearing, or you have to go for modified left-hand converted right-hand drive cars.
And remembering, obviously, Japan's also right-hand drive, not part of this region, but certainly the foundation of our business.
So model complexity then, the synergies that you're drawing on looking at this new structure, model complexity is narrowed down because you're leveraging those synergies across all those markets?
A very key element. The synergies are product, and obviously the big part of that is model complex. So that reduce the complexity and get more volume per platform is a very important part.
It's a subject that comes across our podcast with a number of people we have spoken to, and that is, how do you reduce that complexity? Because it's so important. Complexity is just cost.
Yeah, from many aspects. So I think that is definitely going to be one of the key benefits of this new approach.
Yeah, complexity is the enemy. So, and it just comes through in everything we do, and I just say, John, every podcast that we discuss, it really is a strong theme that eliminating that complexity seems to be a really key element of success.
Without doubt, and as Nissan announced in its Nissan Next program, which was really our midterm plan. Foundation of that was obviously bringing new and exciting products to the market. We've already done Naria. We've announced Z400Z that you referred to. You've got a new Rogue in the US. But all of it is also not only bringing new product, but also ensuring that we have reduced complexity and more volume, more sales per platform, per model. Definitely part of the strategy.
Now, Mark, leading into your other role as president of the African Association for Automotive Manufacturers, can you maybe just at a very high level tell us briefly about what are the big challenges for an automotive brand from a manufacturing perspective?
So I think if we look at Africa, you've got a market that people are saying the outlook is that by 2050 it'll account for 25% of the world population, but never forgetting that Africa consists of 54 different countries. So, and all in their own way are fairly different. The big challenge in Africa is while a lot of people, the overall new vehicle TRV is fairly small. It's just over 1 million, and it's mainly concentrated probably in 4 major markets, being South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, and to a lesser extent Algeria. So we all see Africa as very much the last frontier in automotive. So one of the key objectives of the AAAM is to work with selected governments in Africa to create the framework for auto policy, to have standards in the countries, common homologation standards, because the market is flooded by used vehicles. I think you're fairly familiar what happened with that in terms of New Zealand, with used taking over the market. So it's the used flowing in, a lot of grey imports, in many cases vehicles that don't meet or not designed for Africa, don't meet the standards. So what the AAAM is doing is working with governments, working with the African Union to help create a framework for auto manufacturing and auto industry and regionalization of automotive within the African continent. Obviously, that doesn't mean we're going to end up with every single country building cars. That's never going to happen. But certainly we can create component exchange, component movement, skills transfer, identification of raw materials, because as we all know, one of the key challenges of Africa is industrialization and manufacturing. And automotive does provide, as we've seen in South Africa, as we've seen in Morocco, and a number of other countries. Thailand's another good example, where the automotive industry and its supply industry and related upstream activities brings good quality jobs, good skills, good contribution to GDP. So it's a long journey, but I believe when we look at the future potential of the automotive market in Africa, it is important that we create with government's structure, policy and vision to develop that industry. A good example is what we've recently done in Ghana, where Ghana has put together a very comprehensive auto policy and auto strategy to develop that industry over the next 10 years. And you will shortly see a number of manufacturers with their partners announcing and sharing their plans.
So you mentioned the Ghana situation, and there's a range of global manufacturers, both OE and also suppliers, who are foundation members of the association. Are you able to share some of the success that's been achieved, like some of the specifics of the success?
Well, I think if it's very early days, because the Ghana project is foundation stage. Volkswagen are already there doing what we call SKD operations. Other brands will shortly be announcing their movement into that market. But what is and what we are doing is our members such as Bosch are actively engaging and identifying opportunities, what they can do there from a training and skills point of view. We have a lot of support from organizations in Europe to develop skills academies in Ghana to do those skills transfers. We're in discussion now of how we can create ultimately an auto pact between certain countries. So it's very much a journey. It's definitely not a short-term solution that fixes all, but without doubt, we've now got good engagement at Ghana. We engagement with the Ethiopian government. We're in discussions with Kenya. We are working in Egypt to see how we can help formulate a policy and strategy here. And then at the same time, once that's in place, is to bring and develop skills in those markets. But we must remember, these markets are all very small at the moment. Ghana TRV is probably only between 15 and 20,000. So the potential is very big. But to do that, you need to create some form of regulation and get correct control of what comes into the market as well.
In terms of those used cars and grey imports, where do most of those come from? From Europe?
I think if you look at right-hand drive, mainly out of, I guess, Japan, predominantly. And then in the rest of Africa, left-hand drive coming predominantly out of Europe, Middle East, and to a certain extent, the US.
Now, I'm keen to ask another question around the regional players and what are the key types of actions that you're addressing with the governments, and what are you coming up against? What are some of the challenges you're experiencing with the various governments you're dealing with? Because as you mentioned, the number of countries on the African continent is massive. And very diverse.
So I think from an automotive perspective at the moment, the key players is definitely Morocco and South Africa, where 90% of all automotive production and industry is located. Egypt production is right now is probably close to only 100, thereabout 1,000, potentially huge. So Egypt is potentially the third hub that can be created and will be created, hopefully. And then obviously we must look at the East and West. And if you take the West, the ECOWAS region, total population of ECOWAS is actually bigger than the United States. So the potential is there. It's a case, and this is the real challenge, is to create with those governments. So Nigerian government, for example, is to create that framework that will make it attractive for automotive players to invest, whether it's components, limited assembly. But without framework, without policy, you're not going to get an auto industry. So the big challenge is with government, developing the policy and implementing the policy. If we look at the two markets in Africa that do have a very strong automotive sector, and that is South Africa and Morocco, it's been built over a number of years through close cooperation between the industry, government, labor, to create the framework, to create the vision and consistently apply it. Put that in place in West Africa, I believe over 10, 20 years, there's no reason we can't have a very viable industry there, and the same in West Africa. So you ask me what's the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge is not lack of willingness. There's a tremendous willingness within governments in Africa, obviously not with everyone, but countries that want to work towards establishment of auto. It's a case of trying to find the balances between affordable vehicles coming into the country, because used are affordable, and at the same time developing an infrastructure. So policy and vision is the foundation. That's what we need to put. Without that in place, you're going to have no automotive industry growth.
And government support for that investment for the private organisations, for the auto car companies and the supplier organisations to invest in that infrastructure, the government support for that?
Well, obviously in South Africa, Morocco and Egypt, it's a key component of what's happening in those industries. In the other countries, very, very limited, because there isn't that policy and vision yet. But what we are getting is a lot of support from European governments, European institutions to help build the foundation, particularly on skills, particularly on policy formation, because I think everyone recognizes that the big challenge we all have is how do we create sustainable jobs, sustainable value-adding industrialization on the African continent. So there's a lot of willingness and a lot of support to work towards that. Certainly no easy journey, but we're very committed as the AAAM to engage those who have an interest. And as I've said, there are a lot, particularly if I take Ghana, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, there are a lot who are very keen to do it. And if you've got willing partners on both sides, industry, government, and social partners, I believe we can get there.
Now, Mark, in terms of, can you share with us the amount of manufacturing that is currently being done, and what would be your targets?
I think if you look at it, and I come back to the point, in Egypt, you have very limited manufacturing. It's very much CKD manufacturing. I would say total PRV 200,000, of which only 100,000 is locally made, because Egypt has free trade agreements with Europe, Turkey, and Morocco. So effectively, CBUs come in here duty free. So to build this industry, again, we also need to have that sustainable policy. Morocco is, I guess, approaching around about the production levels of 500,000 plus, mostly exported into Europe, with both Renault and Peugeot significant players there. And South Africa's manufacturing level around about 600,000, of which at least 50% are exported. And we've just announced we'll move into the next phase of the Automotive Industry Development Plan, which comes live next year. It's a plan that takes us through to 2035. So again, if you take total African manufacturing, just over 1 million, 90% of that, 95 is Morocco and South Africa, a little bit in Egypt. And then in Nigeria, before COVID, we had a fairly sustainable SKD operation, us, Hyundai, Volkswagen, there were a few people doing it. That's obviously been affected with the COVID and also slow implementation of government policy. But yes, there's potential, a country of 200 million people. And Ghana just starting. And Kenya has its own industry with Isuzu doing a very good job there, and Toyota active, a few others starting to look at it. So effectively, Morocco, South Africa, and Egypt, and emerging and potential Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya at the moment. It's very limited. But the real opportunity also comes back to components, and I think that's what we've also got to focus on. It's not just building vehicles; it's also ensuring that we can create viable component businesses with a flow of components between markets and between those manufacturing hubs.
You mentioned South Africa exports about 50%. Is that a big part of what you want to develop in terms of the manufacturing in Africa is for export too?
No, I think if you look at at the end of the day, one need the key components is obviously quality, cost, and time. Quality being number one in any of the operations. But to achieve the efficiencies and economies of scale, you can't, and we spoke about it earlier, the complexities of models. You really, the policies are all really designed around high levels of localization, few platforms, high volume of production, the production on the same platform, both for local consumption and export, and the objective being at the end of the day to try and become as forex and duty neutral as possible. And I think the South African and Morocco cases are very good examples of where government policy, government strategy, all stakeholders working together can build and make a very sustainable industry. That model that we need to work on and see how we can implant into a few of the key markets, West and East Africa. But I must reiterate, this is a long-term journey. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But if we don't make a start, we will never get there. And you are looking at a market that potentially is the last frontier in the automotive market. And today, with very, very low motorization and mobility, potential to grow very fast. And it's not just going to be from manufacturing. You need to create access to finance, access to ownership. Those things also need to come into it. So when we talk about activities of AAAM, not just the manufacturing, it's also how do we grow the market? How do we create access through finance to affordable ownership packages and things? So very critical to that.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting. I've had the good fortune to work in a number of OEMs that have transshipped vehicles through either North Africa or South Africa, whether it be Moroccan for a lot of European product getting transshipped across to Morocco, and then the boats go down around dropping off at South Africa and then coming across. So South Africa, when I think of it, the African continent is really right in the middle of the world. So I'm just keen to get your take, given there's the geography of the African continent. What are the advantages of manufacturing in Africa and the opportunities that you see for the rest of the globe remanufacturing in Africa?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we in Africa, you have this future massive potential market. Not today, but coming. Number two is that one of the key focuses, if we look at the South African auto strategy, is how do we increase the regionalization and regional trade in Africa, not just exporting outside of the African continent. So it's very important that we work together to create and grow the overall African market and how we move between them. We have good labor, good skills, logistics superb. If you look at Egypt, the Suez Canal, excellent logistics either way. In the case of Egypt, energy, excess natural gas. Certainly good energy and very and today competitive labor rates and skills. So I think one of the big attractions is that you've got a market that's going to develop and grow. For us, our key focus is we can't rely from a South African point of view, certainly a South African point of view, just on exporting into Europe and other markets. If your point, the logistics, South Africa all the way up to Europe is a long way. So for South Africa's industry going forward, it has to develop a strong presence in sub-Saharan Africa and grow the potential market for that. But certainly if you look at it, there's a market, there's skilled labor, there is good logistics developing, not necessarily in all of Africa, but certainly South Africa, Morocco, you touched on Egypt. So going forward, the only way that an auto industry can be sustainable is the volume of manufacturing, and ultimately we need to have a market in Africa that we can access.
No, I think it was really interesting, Mark. It's good to listen and gain a whole perspective because, I've been in Australia a number of years now, so it's good to hear the opportunities in Africa and the potential. And I think that's key, is providing those skills and good jobs, because if you don't, you have so many social issues. And I think we as a world need to develop these countries and continents right across the world. I think it's really positive.
That's the key. We can't be a recipient in Africa of all the trade in. We have to have some trade out, and there needs to be value-added trade. And also we need to capitalize on our own continent and how we can develop inter-regional trade. That's very important, because if we don't create the jobs, if we don't create sustainability and industrialization and manufacturing, I think it's going to be very difficult to really address the inequalities that exist in Africa today. We see automotive and related as one of those foundations and one of the industries that can contribute towards that.
And when you mention the benefits, there's a lot of benefits that make good sense to be able to manufacture in Africa, or at least start the process to be there and be part of that build-up in the future. Because if you provide the jobs and that, people will start, it will attract other industries, and a lot comes from that.
Correct. I mean, if you look at this, it's the success story of automotive in South Africa is a good example. But I come back to what I was saying earlier. One of the reasons I am and really see Egypt as a market of huge potential is exactly all those factors. Great logistics. You look where it's located. Very good access to energy and cost-effective energy because of the natural gas. A growing economy, a population of over 100 million. Currently a fairly low vehicle per thousand in TRV. Positive GDP foreseen. All the aspects to really turn this into a significant part of the Egyptian economy. But it's not going to happen without clear government policy and strategy, because as long as you are open to imports out of Europe, Turkey, Morocco, that come in totally duty-free, it's very difficult to have a sustainable industry here. So it's important, for example, to have a balance that as an industry we can also contribute from locally, but also export as well, as Morocco and South Africa are doing very successfully.
Okay, very good. Any other things you want to add, Mark? Is there anything you want to add to what we've discussed today?
No, nothing from my side. Great, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time, given that you're extremely busy and it's a crazy time and you've got a market that's growing. One thing that really stood out for me, and it was in your opening statement about who is Mike Whitfield? And you said automotive is in your blood, and you've worked in basically for one organisation right from, was it 1981? Is that correct?
81. Yep, February 81.
So from 1981, you were dipped in the automotive industry, dipped in Nissan, and it really came out clear because I wrote 4 words: blood, passion, drive, and focus. So when you take that dipping in 1981 and you look at what you've achieved through your career to date, and you've still got more to go, mind you, which is exciting. So that's pretty amazing, because the thing you also highlighted was this whole concept of achieving the true potential. And this is what you're doing, and we'll get to that in a minute with what you're doing with the association developing the African market. But you did it when you went to the Nordics, and these were the highlights that you mentioned, was the opportunity to win and to work with in so many countries and so many times. So you've gone through a couple of crises, various recessions, a GFC and a COVID recession, which is so unique, but you're actually in a country that's counter-cyclical to everybody else. The UD truck business was an important learning for you as well. And the new startups in the Nordics, where you employed 180 people, 50-50 male-female split, but you had an average age of 32, so you had a lot of young people to bring into this industry. But getting back to the blood, the drive, the passion, and the focus, you achieved great success with that, but not fly-by-night success. That success has continued on. And that is unique in so many businesses, where you can actually set that structure and keep it going. Because there are many stories of businesses that do well and then they crash when the founders move on, or when the initiators move on. The culture is lost. But you've managed to keep that with that business, which is a real credit to your attributes, which you talked about, what you learn from good leaders and then what you instill with the people that work with you and for you. So you take the good from the good leaders and you remember what was bad and don't repeat that, because that breaks the cycle of what that badness is. So this is how you create the culture of winning and continue to win, and engagement. You build on diversity and you make sure you don't hire all me toos. And that happens with so many leaders. They all want to employ themselves. And then they wonder why they get the same results or they have the same problems, because they don't listen. And one thing you highlighted that you, from what your experiences and good leaders you've worked with, is that you listen. And if you have a plan and the plan's not working, you're brave enough. And this is the courage. And we talk about, that was in Anton's presentation, John, where you have the courage to go, right, that isn't right, let's change the plan. But you listen, you use that diversity. And when you go into the various countries you've worked in, the key thing you really resonated for me was that you actually respect the culture and the dynamics of that market, because they're all different. And this is, once again, the listening comes into play, and you're open to the ideas, because there are people on the ground that actually do know something, but you've got the skills in the industry that are transferable across. And you bring and use those 4 key elements, the blood, the drive, the passion, the focus, to achieve your leveraging with the people. So they're the key points that came through. And it came down to, how do you run so many successful automotive companies? And it comes back to this skill that you have, which is the vision. And having that vision and aligning everyone to that vision. Then have the action plan that flows to, okay, the vision is going to get here, communicating it, but then empowering the people to execute that action plan. But once again, if it's wrong, we need to move it, and let's not be precious about the plan if there needs to be an adjustment. And being open to ideas, not going and say, well, this worked in the Nordics, so it has to be that way here in Egypt. And you're really looking at saying, well, what are the opportunities with the Egyptian market, and why is it different? We then moved to ask about EVs and where are we at with the EV side of things. And you mentioned that there's still a place for internal combustion engines in the African continent, and that makes sense because of infrastructure and some of the investment. So, but there will be a take up, because the African continent, actually, contrary to many people, is actually a quick adopter of technology. So mobile banking, as you mentioned, was something that was adopted quickly. But then there's the other side of things, which, so you'll have certain markets will adopt quickly, but there's still going to be some ICE engines out there. And then we talked about the dealer network and how do you win with the dealer network. And the key points you highlighted, and these really resonate. And this is John, we've got to put this in a book, because first and foremost, it is the trust and open communication. And you mentioned that you cannot win as an OEM if your dealer network is not profitable. You cannot win as an OEM if there isn't a win for the dealer network. So both have to have a win, and both need to trust each other and have open communication and have that alignment of those objectives, because you're setting the vision for them as well. And you mentioned also how some of your dealerships are multi-franchise, but you also have some of your own channel. But the key there is to make sure the communication, the incentives and the training and alignment gives you an unfair advantage over your competitors, because you need to be easy to do business with. And that really resonated for me, the ease of doing business, because that is a huge point of difference. So, and understand that you will go through cycles. There are good times, but there's always bad times. But the bad times don't last forever. And this is where you can cycle out of them. But with the full awareness that there are going to be ups and downs, and it's a long-term game. And that was one thing you really highlight, long-term game, as your career with Nissan. You mentioned the product, the 400Z Proto. There's excitement with the brand. So you've got to have fun with this business. And that's the beauty of the auto business, is that there is fun. Yeah. It beats selling washing machine and cars and technology. There is something about this that gets back to those elements of blood, drive, focus, and passion that just resonates through. And people can see that, and they can understand it, and they relate, and they go on the journey with you. So when you talked about the change in structure and this new region that has been created with Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and India, and Russia, it's about that product synergy and really minimizing complexity, but leveraging the market synergies for the whole area, because there's a lot of synergy there with the type of products. Even though you've got some left-hand and right-hand drive markets, it makes sense, because that area is 30% of the global vehicle purchase, the new TIV. So that's a big chunk of the world volume. What astounded me when you mentioned the West African market opportunity from a population perspective, as big as the US, just that region alone. And when you talked about what you're doing with the association and developing the last frontier, it really is. I was not aware of that at all, and that blew me away as to how big the opportunity is and why it makes sense to have more manufacturing there. Because as an outsider looking in, I see the north and the south of the continent, where you've got Morocco and you've got South Africa, very strong automotive manufacturing countries, but there's this huge infield area where there is huge potential for mobility, and then you'll have manufacturing that matches it. So you've got that market potential, which is huge. And then when we look at you've worked with, you're not just focusing only on your own brand, but you're actually working with governments and other brands, with, for example, Volkswagen and Bosch, are developing the skills in Ghana already. So you're already having wins, but this is a long-term game to get that investment and infrastructure up and running, because we know from investing in the auto industry, the skills are so diverse, and there is actually a good social outcome for each of the countries, because you've actually built a really strong skill set with the people in those countries. And it makes sense to do so. So you've got manufacturing, but you've got engineering and all the associated procurement and all the other bits and pieces. There is a huge knock-on effect with social good for the countries. So that's a credit that you're doing that on top of all the other stuff that you're doing with Nissan alone. So, and then getting the governments to get their policies. Government policy change can take ages, and there's always political pressure to do all the other bits and pieces that they're playing with. So to get them, to take them on the journey and getting them to support the industry, because it actually will help their people and help them and help GDP growth in the long term, it just makes sense. So you're juggling a lot, and having achieved plenty already, there's still that's a huge legacy getting this bit done as far as your contribution to not just the industry but also to the globe. And when we look at what are the advantages with manufacturing in Africa, the future market potential is the one that stands out. Getting those people mobile with an automotive solution is huge. And the skills development that go with that the logistics, especially when you talked about Egypt with the gas and the Suez Canal that you've got there, and the infrastructure to move stock around and product quickly and efficiently, it really does resonate. And just the location, it's so central to the world, and I think a lot of people will start to look at, well, this makes more sense, because when you get the stability through those the development of those other countries with their manufacturing, that will then give more confidence, and there'll be that knock-on effect. So I think it's amazing. I've really appreciated this discussion with you. It's enlightened me, and I've been in this industry for a few years. I started in 81 as well. So I'm always fascinated to hear a story of someone who is so passionate about the auto business, because both John and I are, and just to hear your formula for success, but the ingredients that go back to basically who you are and why. And the why really resonated through in everything. And it really makes sense as to why so many businesses you've been involved with have been so successful, but also how many people then go on the journey with you. And that is a credit to you as a leader, but also a credit to how you go about and where your vision is for this industry and manufacturing. So have I missed anything?
Mark, thank you. That's very, very good. Now I understand why John got you to do it. So thank you. And I think the important thing is two other things. Is obviously is always it's not it's a team. I mean, you none of this can ever you do it together as a team. And very importantly, on these journeys, you need to have fun, because the day you stop having fun is the day that actually you must stop and go and do something else. And certainly, I'm very privileged to be part of a fantastic team, but even more privileged that I still have a lot of fun doing what I'm doing. So thank you very much, and all the best. You guys have a good day.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Mark. We really appreciate your time.
And I kept going back to the 4 points that when Mike first spoke, he said automotive, and then he said blood, passion, drive, focus. And I just wrote them down. I went, yep. And then it kept going back to that when you looked at everything else he was doing, went back to blood, drive, passion, focus. And you know what made a good leader? Well, you need to have vision and focus. And it was interesting that the last bit I wish he said that beforehand, because the fun is the key. Yeah. You got to have fun in this business. And when the fun's gone, when it's no fun, it's when it's all over.
I've reported to him twice, when I worked for UD Trucks for a couple of years, and in Nissan Nordic for 3.5 years. I reported directly to him, and everything he says there, he does. He makes sure that everybody has fun, that everybody understands the vision. You know, he walks the talk. He listens. He gets everybody involved. There's no, this person's better than that person. Everything's about process and systems, and this is where we want to go. And we just work solidly at it. And there's no antagonism and nothing. Absolute pleasure to work for someone like that. You can't believe it.
Oh, I can. I can see it. It just stands out. Well, and that's a sign of a good leader, is when they'll run through brick walls for you. Yeah. It's like, yep, this is where we've just talked about this, and it's like, yeah, I really want to do this. And you don't want to let him down.
And he'll always back you. If you hit a brick wall, like with Region or whatever, he'll be on the phone talking and moving things away for you and opening up the passage, that you can achieve everything. Because you're getting your goals, he's getting his goals.
I was blown away by the size of the West African market potential.
A lot of those countries have got huge riches. Angola's got diamonds and oil and all those type of things. Nigeria's got oil. They've got a huge amount of natural resources.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully you got as much out of today's episode as we did. It was great to talk to Mike and get his background on his amazing career, but also what is actually going on the African continent and the opportunities for global automotive, and just how the auto industry is such a contributor to the social good of so many countries. So it definitely shouldn't be forgotten. But if you want to see more of our episodes, please like us on LinkedIn, like us on YouTube, and also please subscribe to our channel and also to the bell, so that you can get notifications for when we have our next episode available for you to watch or listen to.
And if you're interested in any of our services, please reach out to either Mark Palavestra or myself, John Sinclair, on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to support you where possible. Have a good week, and we'll speak to you again next week.